Thursday, sunshine in 79. Wednesday, sunshine in 62. Thursday, sunshine in 67. Friday, sunshine in 71. And next Saturday, mostly cloudy with a high of 71.
WOON Woonsocket Radio, ON AM and FM.
Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Were the dramatic 1980 UFO encounters in Rendlesham Forest, England, only the tip of a very large iceberg? What did we ourselves experience there in 2012? Are there really reptilian extraterrestrials?
Hello, and welcome to the 996th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app, from TalkStream Live, on YouTube, and via TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and that was Paul. And today we bring you a new guest on a very different take on an old interest of ours. To join us, you can give us a call from anywhere, 401-766-1240, or you can send a message to us via Facebook, because email is still...
well, it's not down, but I can't access it here.
Well, we can
Very
access it.
annoying.
We won't access it real time, but we will get back to you.
Anyway, coming to us from the UK via Skype today is Philip Kinsella, who is both a clairvoyant medium and UFO investigator/author. Having had many bizarre UFO and paranormal experiences throughout his life, along with his identical twin brother Ronald, he began to research the phenomenon on a serious level after an alien abduction experience in 1989. Ronald and Philip Kinsella are the authors of 10 books at present. The center of our discussion today is the new book Sky Crash, authored by Philip and our old friend Brenda Butler. The book reopens the landmark Rendlesham Forest UFO case of 1980. Philip and Ronald also host their own radio show, Twin Souls, at the Paranormal UK Radio Network. His website, thekinsellatwins.com.
And unfortunately, Brenda Butler, Philip's co-author, was not able to be with us today. But she was last on the show April 27th, 2013. The show number is number 218. Jeez, we've come a long way since then. That was back in 2013, and the show archives at behindtheparanormal.com. So without further ado, Philip Kinsella, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Thank you very much indeed, Ben and Paul. I'm very honoured to be here. And yes, interesting, when you had Brenda Butler on, I have to say in 2013, that's when Keppel-Band Publishing actually released Sky Crash Throughout Time, which was a book that we had both co-authored surrounding cases not just centred around the 1980 event, which everyone knows about in Roswell's England, or England's Roswell, as they call it, but also a strange experiences before and after, because everyone just assumes that, that the encounters that occurred there at Rendlesham in Suffolk was just the 1980 event, and that's far from the truth. So yes, that was amazing, quite incredible.
Oh yeah, well I guess speaking of Sky Crash, so much of what's in your book Sky Crash, it really hit home with us because we had some very odd experiences when we were there in 2012, and your co-author Brenda was with us at the time of our little sort of investigation of that. In your 4 years of research, what have you found out about ongoing phenomena in Rendlesham Forest, as briefly as you can?
Well, there is still light phenomena, stones falling from a clear blue sky that are red hot. The appearances also of the helicopters, because we were hassled by them when we were subsequently doing our research in the forest at low level and at night. So, yeah, the phenomena is still continuing. And this begs the question as to whether or not certain areas or geographical locations around the world are kind of like hot spots for unusual activity. And that this is what I've been looking into beyond Sky Crash Throughout Time. And subsequently, Philip Mantle, British ufologist, has his own publishing company and decided to re-release the book last year, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an interesting. You kind of made a caveat in our sort of pre-show discussion here, because we wanted to really ask what a clairvoyant like yourself happen. What happens at a place like Rendlesham with those abilities. But you clarified. You're like, well, I don't claim to be anything. So if you don't want to put a label on it, I understand. But you definitely experienced something.
Yes, absolutely. And we are all what people call clairvoyant. I mean, the brain is literally a transmitter and receiver, rather like your mobile phone, but on a far more biological and mental complex level. And when people call you clairvoyant, it's just translating information coming from another source, and very much like the UFO phenomena, although we don't get a lot of information coming from that side, wherever they're coming from. We did a psychic experiment on the 8th of June, 1998, which for me, and was private, proved one aspect that I could kind of like put in a little box with regards to the phenomena, that consciousness has some kind of connection with this, as whether or not the phenomena is reading our minds or we are promoting this phenomena itself within a will or a willing from our end. So that was something where we summoned a UFO. And that was performed by a psychic experiment, if people want to understand that, because we were desperate to try and see what was behind the phenomena and why this area was, so strange, and whether or not we could summon something. And that's exactly what happened. And that case has been documented. And of course, the danger is that with regards to any form of research, when you're looking into a certain area, whether it be Area 51 or, Skinwalker Ranch, which is protected, or Suffolk in England, or Paul Sinclair's brilliant research here in England in Bempton, you feel like you're crossing over onto someone else's territory, and you have to be very careful because you might put a few noses out, so to speak.
So what kind of experiment did you do?
Yes, well, it all came under the recommendation of the late Karen Carpenter through her song Calling Occupants. And when we had subsequently been doing our research at Rendlesham, under the recommendation of another wonderful and good friend and author UFO researcher, we decided to venture out there. And on one occasion, a week before we went to the forest on the 8th of June, 1998, myself, my identical twin brother Ronald, and a good friend Susan sat in a circle and sent out an intention to whatever or whoever to state that we were going back there on the 8th of June 1998 and we wanted them to appear to us. We would take no cameras. I'm not interested in people saying we need evidence, because whatever evidence you bring to the table will be torn apart. It was to be a personal experience. So on the 8th of June, a week after the experiment, the psychic experiment, we went into the forest, and we went into the area near Capel Green, which is a big farmer's field, half of which was crop and the other half dirt. And it was under the cloak of darkness. Yes, I'm sure you both have. And we used to set up a little camp on the edge of where the edge of that part of the forest was. And so we crawled into the part of the farmer's field that was dirt at that point. We sat down and we meditated. And this would have roughly been about around about 9:47 at night. There was a full moon, the sky was clear. And we sat in a circle and meditated and came out of it. And then we saw something very strange. We saw this red light that appeared near the farmer's house. And we thought, first of all, that the farmer had seen us in his field from the other end and got in his car and was going to come across and to chase us off. So we started to move back towards the entrance of the forest. And then I stopped because I thought, well, a car's light is not red and there's only one of them. And as we watched this light coming forward, it then shot across diagonally and disappeared into the other part of the farmer's field that had crop in it. And we thought, wow, that was amazing. And that was roughly around, if memory serves me correct, around about 7 minutes past 10. At 10:15 exactly, on the 8th of June 1998, and at the other end of the field were these very tall trees, there was a flash of light, and there appeared a pyramidical object, and then underneath a gap and a circular appendage. And it was huge, and the top part of it was emanating light like gold and white, as though it was coming from an inner source from inside the triangle, and underneath the bank the bank beneath it, the other part of the object that was separated, rather like the brim of a witch's hat, there was a bank of blue lights, and the triangle started moving one way, and the bank of lights were moving the other, almost like clockwork. And we viewed it in the binoculars, and it was incredible. It made no sound, and then I started to run towards it. And as I started to run towards it, I was excited but fearful. The other two, I was shouting back, asking them to tell me that it is triangular in nature, that it has a gap and a circle appendage. And I wanted to confirm that what I was seeing was the same as what they were seeing. And I remembered my jeans getting soaked as I ran through that part of the field where the crop was. And when I came nearer to it, I remembered looking up at it and thinking, my God, this is amazing. And then I tripped. And as soon as I tripped, it was gone. It just disappeared. And I fell to the ground, took in a load of dirt in my mouth. And then I cried, and then I laughed because I thought, no one will believe us. And this is something that I reported the very next day to a well-known UFO magazine, spoke to an editor whose name I couldn't even pronounce, let alone spell, someone called Bream Forbes. He asked me, he didn't know who I was, to send all the information to him that he would send them to Peter Robbins. He didn't know that I knew Peter Robbins. And then which we did, and then there was nothing. It's not a conspiracy, but a month later, or around about a month later, I think it was, if memory serves me correct, I phoned the magazine back up and said, look, I spoke to a guy called Bream Forbes. No, we don't have anyone here of that name. So if anyone's got that information, please send it back to me.
Well, Peter often listens, so we'll see.
Yeah, Peter is a good friend, and he, as far as I know, he didn't get any of the information. So it was all very strange, but it proved something to me. I wanted to see whether or not there was some kind of connection between the human psyche and whether or not this intelligence or this force, and I'll call it that, is able to pluck into our minds, read our minds, or, is this something that is that's generated within the depths of the human mind that projects itself to you as the way that it would want you to see it. Some people have been unkind and told me that, what you were seeing was the beams to the Orford Ness Lighthouse. Rubbish. We were there when the lighthouse... Yeah, you got it, you guys, because that is just ridiculous. If your American troops were chasing the beams to the Orford Ness Lighthouse, then God help your country and ours.
Indeed.
They're fully trained military men.
That's very true. Well, your approach is very similar to our own. We certainly consider, as I mentioned before, we went on the air, when we lectured in Woodbridge near Rendlesham Forest, we had a large group of people, many of whom, they kept us really there for hours talking about their own experiences, some of which were ultra bizarre and have never been published in any way. One fellow, Ben, I'm sure you remember, was talking about a creature he saw crossing the road that's something right out of Lovecraft, and so it was quite the enlightening evening. And our impression, of course, was that it was, in our terms, a flap area. John Keel may call it a window area, because things go back to Saxon times, and you mentioned consciousness. We must have a mutual friend named Anthony Peake.
I must confess, Anthony Peake, I've not heard of Anthony Peake, I'm afraid.
Well,
Forgive my impudence.
We're going to see that you're introduced. He's going to be on our 1000th show in a few weeks. But really absolutely amazing stuff. Now, Brenda Butler, your co-author and our good friend, lives in that area.
Yes.
And talked about a very strange person named David Daniels, which you talk about in your book. Could you mention that?
Yes, well, this occurred roughly and around about the time when Jenny Randalls, British ufologist, Dot Street, one of Brenda's friends.
Yeah, we know that too.
Yeah. And they had, as you are well aware, just published Sky Crash, a Cosmic Conspiracy that came out from Neville Spearman in 1984. And David Daniels suddenly turned up at the scene, which was this man who claimed that he was a reptilian. And although most people will raise their eyebrows, because when I had access to Brenda's research material, when we were putting Sky Crash Throughout Time, the manuscript together, I was stunned to discover that this particular fellow called David Daniels had actually proven to Brenda who he was, and to namely other ufologists, not only to ufologists like Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens, who David Daniels had accessed as Father Daniels in America, but also Jenny Randalls, and also Lord Admiral Hill Norton here in London, where Brenda and David Daniels had a meeting with him, and also Ralph Noyes, who was part of the Ministry of Defense and went on to write a science fiction book which I have, called A Secret Prophet. So this guy, or this man, was very strange, or alien as they would call it. And when I subsequently started to put the material to the book together, I interviewed some of the local witnesses. And let me tell you, when they are in front of you and they're looking you in the eye and they are telling you what they experienced, that is a completely different story altogether. It's all very well for people to sneer and laugh and say, oh, I don't believe it. But when you start to look, if you read the book, at the very strange high levels of strangeness that surrounded this guy, and not only that, but I am convinced that before I even met Brenda Butler, before I got involved with the book Sky Crash Throughout Time, not to be mistaken through their first book, The Sky Crash, A Cosmic Conspiracy, that we, my brother and myself and Susan, we think had met this guy at the forest when we did a Sky Crash, long before I met Brenda, as I said, using the Elias Joseph. And his characteristics and mannerisms were certainly very much the same as this so-called David Daniels. So, yes, he was otherworldly. In fact, with Ralph Noyes, when he went to go and meet Ralph Noyes in London, David Daniels actually stood on one of the bridges to London that wasn't far from one of the Central Television studios, raised his arms in the air and presented these three circular UFOs in triangular formation. They were separate, to demonstrate his so-called power. This entity could read minds, and most people found him very bizarre and frightening. They didn't like being in his company. They didn't know what he was about or what he was after. And he had no interest whatsoever in the initial 1980 event that happened with the American troops, with your troops at Bentwaters during the 1980 over the Christmas, three-night Christmas period. So it was very strange, and people assumed that perhaps he was there to muddy the waters, but no, he didn't muddy the waters. Brenda is an exceptionally very strong lady. She's very much admired, and she won't take any nonsense. And I was very honored to have been able to be shown not just her material, but also some of the residue that apparently came off of the object, the molten object that Colonel Charles Holt had seen with his men on the night of 1980 during the Christmas period, that had solidified into this strange material. So, when you talk of David Daniels, Brenda is adamant, and I respect what she says, that he had no part to play within the initial unfolding of Rendlesham case itself. But it seems very strange that his timing was perfect, and just subsequently after the release of their first book, because they did reprint it into paperback, it was hardback, Sky Crash, A Cosmic Conspiracy. So very bizarre. He disappeared. No one could knew where he was, but I think that perhaps he had somehow appeared to us many years later, and before I got involved with the case, when we were doing a Sky Crash with a group from a local UFO network that I belonged to, and every single person within that group, all they spoke about was Joseph. And when I look at the material of David Daniels, the same was said with him. So who knows? Was it one of the same? There's no way of proving it, but a gut instinct tells me that is what I feel.
Well, one of the fascinating points that you make, Philip, is the notion that we contribute to the experience ourselves, and we have found that really from day one,
Yes.
that we don't sit there and simply experience things. We bring, whether it be preconceived notions or our own energies or whatever you want to call it to these things. We have, I think the nature of the experience is determined by this to a great degree. When I, much to my shock, encountered a Bigfoot-like creature on September 16, 2016 in Pennsylvania.
Wow.
It appeared to be the same. I was looking for something entirely different. As a little girl was to encounter not long after that in broad daylight in a dirt road below the same hill. And
Wow.
I considered it a sacred experience. I felt privileged. But she was utterly terrified, and to this day will not talk to us. She's, gosh, must be in college by now.
Oh no, not that. I don't think she's probably like elementary school, maybe.
Okay, well,
maybe
nevertheless,
middle school at this
I
point.
hope someday she'll talk to us about it. But nevertheless, and there are many experiences we've recorded from witnesses who say that when it comes to UFOs, some people in one group would see it, other people would not see it.
Yes.
Other people would see different things. I'm thinking particularly of the late Linda Godfrey, our good friend, and a cryptozoological researcher and a journalist, told us about the site in Iowa where people would see an orb, as they're called, in a basement of a historic home. And when she went down and she saw this, other people will see a boy, sometimes at the same time as someone else is seeing the orb. So,
Or there's also the airships of the Hudson River Valley as well.
yes,
Where it's late 1800s, early 1900s, and everyone's looking up and they're like, oh, it's just some eccentric millionaire, flying around in a zeppelin. and
it could well have been.
it could have been,
Yeah.
but it was moving incredibly fast. Like nothing existed at that point in time. But as people, I remember I think it was Linda Zimmerman who did a talk that
Yes.
we happened to be speaking alongside her, and I sat in. And she was explaining that whole event, and it was super interesting to listen to because it shows that we use the terms we can to kind of order our reality, in a sense, right? There's 4 ways that humans really do it through language, art, music, and ritual, and so we use these 4 tools to order reality around us, to understand it, to create a story that we can understand.
And
yes.
as I say, we put labels on things that we can understand and do not necessarily reflect the deeper reality.
What we have to understand, however, is that I think that when we are exploring the subject matter of not only ufology, but also cryptozoology and other areas of the paranormal, we as a species, we don't know enough about ourselves and the enhancement of consciousness or the mind and our
Yes.
ability to create from that.
Indeed.
And I think that this may open up new parallels. I have finished a new book that's called Terrestrial Trespassers that's due out next year that explores some of these finer points in theoretical detail. But I think that this multi-complex phenomena, the light phenomena, is certainly an area that's very interesting, and I will explain that. Mediums, for instance, or I don't like the word because it's so Victorian. It reminds me of women sitting around a table and rapping underneath for the dead. But
so much so. Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
translators, I think we are. As a translator, you see these small lights. Sometimes they're in different colors, like blues, yellows, gold, whatever. I couldn't tell you what they are. People say that they're spirit manifestation. We don't know because the phenomena doesn't tell us. Now, UFOs come on a much larger level of light phenomena, and this light phenomena is known to manifest or open these portals. So our argument is basically where are these aliens? Where are the dogmen? Where are the Sasquatch? Where exactly are they? And because the amount that's been recorded and experienced, not just within your great country, and I have to say that America is one of the leading places with UFO activity and Sasquatch and dogman sightings and the rest of it. But where are they? So I think this leads us then into the very carefully into hyperdimensional hypothesis, interdimensional hypothesis, whatever. Because, as I said previously to you gentlemen before, that we've had to move away from the stagnated views of ufology in terms of the physical nuts and bolts level of reality. And have we considered also that in certain cases with regards to this phenomena, that as it comes into our reality, it somehow combines itself with the material of this world in order to create shape? That's another area that I've been looking into. And, you know, so I think that certainly with Rendlesham, and certainly it's not unique in terms of its levels of high strangeness, because there are many other areas around the world. But, you know, this nest of activity seems to promote this. It reminds me of Stephen King's It. When you know, it was all to do with this being from another world. I'm not saying that's what the phenomena is, but certainly I think Stephen King, brilliant writer, certainly tapped into something there, and using an extension that connects into people's worst fears that they see. I think the phenomena, you're right, Paul and Ben, when it does come into play, when it does come into effect, let's say, for instance, UFO sighting at close range, and there is some kind of interaction, I believe that the force responsible is then starting to integrate itself on a personal level of the human psyche and will get through to you this way. That's why some people will see in a group UFO encounter or alien abduction phenomena, or even cryptid sightings, that some will see something quite slightly different from someone else. And this is interesting within the extreme. So, you know, with all this paraphernalia of different aliens and beings, you know, my research has been to look and see where exactly are they and why is it that there are so many of them, and the system we serve is adamant not to give any clues away. And I think perhaps in some respect that the reason that they're doing that is because there may be darker reasons behind it. Literally.
Yes. Well, this is a good time for our, mid-show break. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. We'll be right back with our great guest, Philip Kinsella. So stay with us.
Experience Pictures at an Exhibition, a concert by the Rhode Island Wind Ensemble to benefit the glorious St. Anne Arts and Cultural Center. Sunday, May 21st at 3 p.m. at St. Anne's, 84 Cumberland Street, Woonsocket. Admission is $20 and all proceeds benefit the St. Anne Arts and Cultural Center. Tickets are available at Beela's Flowers, Creative Impressions, The Honey Shop, Timeless Antiques, Vos True Value Hardware, or call 401-356-0713. We'll see you there.
You can depend on us for public service, ON Radio.
Hello and welcome back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno with our wonderful guest, Philip Kinsella. And we are talking about some very interesting things on whether it's phenomenologically or anything in regards to the UFO phenomena and how one experiences it. And I want to kick this last portion of our show off with there's a concept I've really been kind of engaging with recently by Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor. And he brings this really interesting idea of there's sort of two versions of the self that have kind of existed throughout human history. So the first one is the porous self, which is considered like the pre-modern idea of how we view ourselves and how we interact with the world around us, which is essentially the porous self. So the porous self, there's sort of this very thin layer that delineates ourselves from the world around us. It kind of allows us to where we begin and where the world begins. It's kind of like a blurry line. So you're able to interact with the world around you, whether it be in a mythical sense, political sense, etc. This idea of the self isn't like self-contained. It's sort of a part of everything else going on around you. Then there's sort of the modern version of the self known as the buffered self, which is sort of the modern way we see ourselves now, which there's this wall between ourselves and the world, where we can step back and analyze the portions of reality and break it apart so we can figure it out ever so slightly. And it's interesting because it brings us to this point that we as a species I don't want to say crave. It's not really the right word. It's something we do by habit, where we create a mythology out of things. Where we can't help it as much as we try with material reductionism, etc. We still create a mythology around things, especially in our modern society nowadays. I have this sort of like pet theory that I've yet to really expand upon, that the paranormal, including ufology, etc., is sort of the mythology of the modern world, where it's all these things that exist on the fringes but somehow interact with us on a daily basis. I mean, everybody's so into the idea of, the Pentagon releasing, UFO reports. Even, Joe Schmo down the street is like, oh, that's actually kind of interesting. But it's one of those things where it's a part of our daily lives. And so as this idea of mythology, right, rather than being some goofy thing that's not really real, but rather a story that we're a part of, right? And we crave to be a part of something bigger. So with the idea of ufology, in a sense, kind of needing to step away from that and see the bigger picture of the mythology here, is this the direction we need to step into to understand the story?
Certainly, we have to look into other areas of research. As I stated before, we have been stagnated for decades in this whole idea that they're coming from another planet. I'm not disputing that, but we have to understand that in our search for those answers, we have to look way beyond levels of ufology and cryptozoology and the paranormal and other areas of the mind, consciousness. And what's interesting is that with regards to belief, shaping belief, that becomes a reality. We were shaped as a reality, but unfortunately, a lot of our genesis has been hidden, submerged under a lot of, contradicting data. The official domain science is that we evolved by accident, and the religious interpretation is rather supernatural and whipped up in about 6 days and seventh day to rest. I'm not going to go down that road. I don't want to upset people. But the reality is far more interesting and fascinating. Mind consciousness is the builder. It creates. Everything around us has been created from the mind. And I think that the mind is omnipresent, consciously, individually, and has the power to manifest certain, realities, as it were. So people will say, no, I don't believe this. I'm not going to accept that because their idealism, their belief system, their structured belief system has been compromised. But I'm happy to say that I'm very open to all forms of speculation. Indeed, I think that as our human journey, which is very limited in this reality, comes to an end, I don't believe that is the end. I believe that there is a lot more to the continuation of this that goes beyond what we perceive as reality here. So I totally agree with you, Ben, in terms of looking at the folklore, because that's been shaped into our psyche and almost manifested into a reality. So, as we understand it, when people pass over to what we call the other side, there is a certain area called the astral planes or the summerlands where allegedly, and we've got to look into this, that most of anything that's thought can become a creation, a reality within itself. So I do believe that on a structured mental level, conscious level, certain ideas and areas need to be looked at. And I think that perhaps that you also may have your answers there, Ben. It seems very fascinating, and I'm on the same page as you there completely. So yes, absolutely. We're limited. And I think that the system that we serve that's lied to us, has categorically lied to us, doesn't know. If it does know more than we know through a collection of data from other researchers secretly, if it knows more than we know, it's got a problem on its hand because it's programmed the masses in a very basic model of reality. And now we have this phenomena that seems to be, and it is increasing. I have to state that for a fact. It's increasing. And the system doesn't know how to tell the people, oh, ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem. UFOs are real, and so are cryptids, and so is elements of the paranormal. But we're not quite sure how to explain to you how it can just come in and go out. That might frighten a lot of people. So I think and feel also to tell individuals that perhaps they're here already walking among us is another area that might frighten a lot of people. I do have a sense of humor. Let me try and find the zip and pull the mask up. I'm just joking, you guys. You've got to break the ice a little bit here, Before
you start talking about philosophy, you always gotta keep it a little light.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's wonderful that, yourselves, Ben and Paul, as brilliant researchers, as well as many others around the world, we're all trying to find the holy grail of what this all means. But I think that when we get to that point, if it is revealed to us in this life, I think we're going to be really stunned to find that it is not just how we perceive it or how the phenomena presents itself through to us. I think that we're going to find that we're going to be entering into multidimensional levels of realities that are a part creation of us and part creation of something else. Who knows?
Well, on that note, let's go to a question from our Colombian connection, Peter Shelley in Bogota.
Yes, I'm
Ben,
glad.
take
I'm
it
glad
away.
we finally found an alliteration that works best. So Peter writes to us: have you looked into another UFO case, the 1974 Avali abduction? A couple driving home from Avali with their 3 children ran into a green fog, missing time, and aliens supposedly involved.
Yes, that is. I haven't actually researched that completely, but I do know of the case. And this is something that you'll find with a lot of UFO cases, the levels of high strangeness that come with it. Certainly mist or fog or missing time is one element. And I've just been put in touch with another amazing ufologist, Steve Aspin, who's written a book called Out of Time, which deals with the abduction phenomena. And one of the fascinating parts to this is the lack of not recalling what occurred. Now, when I had an experience that they call an alien abduction, I don't quite know what it was, although it was put into that category of what we would call an abduction in 1989, I wanted to find out more about the reality of this phenomena, not just taking it as hearsay and accepting and saying to myself I was kidnapped by aliens. I wanted to find out what the phenomenon was about and where it came from. Now, the interesting facet to this, when people are, as they call, taken, I think perhaps it's a possibility that they are removed from our time, and the centralized processing of consciousness on this level that we call reality is removed temporarily. And when they're replaced back to where they've been taken, there could be some gap within the mind of why they're not able to recall the events so clearly. And I think that also the abductees, as they call them, their abductors, with the abductors make certain that these memories are buried so deep that there's no recall. So I think it's fascinating. That's one case I do know about, but have not, and I'm very honest and black and white. That's me all over. I haven't looked into that completely, but it's just one case of many, many hundreds, maybe thousands of cases around the world.
Well, that's fascinating, your own abduction experience, because in the book you mentioned the discovery of a chip in your shoulder.
In my right ear.
Oh, your ear. I'm sorry, I thought it said shoulder. But can you talk a bit about that? Was that an implant, do you think?
Well, Brenda had hers. I think you're probably saying Brenda had her chip in the shoulder. I remember her telling me that. Yes, she had that. Mine was in the right ear. So I had a lot of problems with my right ear many years after the initial event in 1989. And I had profuse nosebleeds to the right nostril. That was very embarrassing. They were going to cauterize my nose, but they did not get round to doing that because they stopped. But the right ear, when I'd gone to the doctors on no less than 3 occasions, on the 3rd occasion, they didn't know who I was. I mean, I'm Joe Bloggs to many people anyway. When I went to the doctors, the doctor brought out the device and had a look and had a good look and then another look. And then she went to go and get another doctor and brought her in. And she looked in my ear and she said some very strange things. She said, it looks like it's still healing and it has a crystalline structure within it. Now, there were some other things said, but as you know, I'm black and white. I won't add or subtract anything here. She put the device down and went back, and the other lady looked at me behind her desk and she said, have you been abducted by aliens? Well, I left the doctor's surgery far worse than when I got to my car. But I will tell you what was strange is that they didn't send me to an ear specialist or, in the central Bedford hospital here. No. So, and that was all due to the fact that I felt the device, whatever it was, retract, literally physically move back in my ear on one of my birthdays when I was resting. And that prompted me to go and have it looked at again. But you'll find that, with regards to this subject matter, people say, I want evidence, I want proof. But whatever proof you bring to the table, this phenomena appears to kind of like it's almost like the X-Files, right? I mean, when Mulder and Scully was on a case and you saw all the wonderful things going on, and at the end, they were left with hardly anything. And I think the phenomena does that because it's not within our reality. The object, I think, or feel is still in there. And for personal reasons that I can't mention here, because of something that happened to the world roughly about 3 years ago, I will say for everyone that I have been injected 3 times, never again. There was another incident that occurred that's in my new book, because I was brave enough to explain what happened. And there may have been another intervention, whether or not that had anything to do with the so-called stuff that was administered into the body. And they, whatever they were, came in and did what they had to do. I don't know. But that's another area that's very sensitive. And I've spoken to other researchers about that because it hasn't been tackled because, for one, we're not allowed to mention it. Strangely, certain words, keywords, we're not allowed to use with regards to the so-called thing that happened 3 years ago, and where certain people had some kind of help towards that. I will
One
say
wants
that.
to avoid being burned at the stake. You know. But
So, yeah.
no, well, I was just going to say, why don't we take a moment, Philip, if you could tell people about your books, where they can get them, and the website, and what you're working on now.
Yeah, well, I've had a number of books published by other publishers. Most of them are out of print now through contract. But one of them is called "You, the Public, Deceive: The Grand UFO Deception." That's available from Philip Mantle's Flying Disc Press. And I've also got another one called God, there's so many I've forgotten now.
I know we've gotten to that point too.
Guardians of the Dead, which deals with the psychic component, and then the new one, which is due out. Obviously, Sky Crash throughout time that we've been speaking a little bit about, but then the new one that's due out in 2024 called Terrestrial Trespassers, which deals with the greys, the abductions, and areas of high strangeness. And I think for me and for many other researchers out there, it's very difficult because you want to tell the truth, which I do in the works. But unfortunately, on many social platform sites, you are gagged. And there is this fear of not being able to say what you need to say. For instance, I will explain, and our website, www.thekinsellertwins.com, just put that in there. Look at the art my brother's done and everything. But there was one program I was watching that was talking about cattle, and I'm not going to finish the sentence of what that word is at the end of it.
Yes.
But being informed that we cannot use that word with regards to the phenomena at hand. And so I think and feel that it's really very annoying, and not only that, but also being infiltrated with a lot of other people's personal opinions. I've always been open to any form of research or theoretical aspects surrounding the phenomena of not just ufology or cryptozoology, but the paranormal. But unfortunately, you find yourself kind of like put in a corner with regards to, trying to evolve and progress. But I think that the phenomena is linked within each of us on a very personal level of psychic integration. I think that you are the personal participant within your evolving journey. I don't think it's we're all trying to plug against the same box and make it fit and give it a name. I think that there's some kind of evolution, not just on a physical or biological material level there.
Well, that's a really interesting point, because we do tend to put ourselves in little boxes, don't we? It's especially intellectually, and I always found it kind of interesting, having grown up and being indoctrinated by my father here into the field, so to speak, that I found everybody said the same stuff, and it was all sort of informed. Not so much anymore. Things have progressed slightly, but a lot of it was based on 19th century spiritualism, and the complete opposite side of the coin, where it was just hardcore reductionist materialism, and then never the twain shall meet. And so at this point, I figured there has to be a middle ground somewhere where there, because it's not all one or the other. It's either completely intuitive or the opposite, and then you have problems with both ways of thinking, because then both negate completely different portions of reality that we experience daily. You know,
Yes, Ben, yes,
that's why
absolutely.
I'm not a huge fan of Plato. But anyway, I digress. So there's a really interesting philosopher by the name of Thomas Nagel who put forth this essay called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?" And I referenced this on many shows, and I highly recommend everybody reads it because it is a very, very, very important, because it tackles the subject-object question in a very interesting way, and it explores, what is it like to be a bat? Do we know what it's like to be a bat? Can we know? And the ultimate answer is, well, no. All we know is how to be a human consciousness in a bat body. And I found that this was very important because when doing shows on disclosure, right, or something in that realm, the extraterrestrials have intentions of helping us, saving us, or they're here to destroy us, or etc. And I put this forth. I'm like, well, how do we know? I don't even know what it's like to be my father here. Let alone I barely know myself enough. How do I know what an extraterrestrial has to say or do if they have the same moral structure as we do? It's hard to tell if somebody across the road has the same moral structure you do, let alone a completely different species. And I think one of the major problems that we suffer in this field is we close ourselves off from different disciplines, and
Yes.
we need a more liberal approach in
Yes.
this regard. You know what I mean?
Yes, I agree with you there most definitely. And I think and feel that, our understanding of this reality is muddied still. But we have come a long way in the sense that we're starting to ask more questions. We're not so frightened now as a society to talk about UFOs. Indeed, I'm not just talking about this Pentagon business and the release of those flimsy documents. And then, of course, the really very strange admittance on national television news here that two UFOs have been shot down and another one, that were balloons. And while they used the acronym UFO on national television, when here in England, and I'm sure in your country, they never would have ever ushered those words, whether or not there was some kind of psychological meaning behind all of this, which is, I don't think is very good myself personally. So, but I do agree with you. I think that our understanding is limited on a human level because we only see ourselves as human and nothing more, because the way we've been programmed is that, well, it's just the human race which is the most intelligent being in the universe, and let's not look too deep into the universe and what that is all about, because that would bend your mind completely. But I think now we're beginning to open up to the fact that maybe the human is not the only intelligent life form around, and that perhaps we are now open to these speculative conclusions that interdimensional hypotheses, are a reality. Because we're still kind of coming out of that medieval type of thinking. And you can't blame a lot of people around within the world because they have been programmed by a centralized system that's told them what is right and what is wrong. And, which isn't a bad thing. But in terms of this subject matter, with regards to ufology and cryptozoology and paranormal, it's now out of the bag. I think more people are more inclined to accept the hypothesis that there is some reality and truth behind it. So, but we've still got a system, a damn system, that is so obstinate and not wanting to release information to the public to say, yes, folks, they're real, and let's work together. I'll tell you something very quickly here. I belong to NUFORS, National UFO Reporting Service. It was created by my good friend Nigel Ross. We wrote to Parliament, to a very influential member there. We said, look, let's have a meeting with your elite. Let's sit around the table and talk about this, about the UFO subject. Let's discuss this openly. Let's put all our truths, everything on the table and work together. And you guessed it, I got silence back. And this is like your senators and your governments as well. These are the people that are supposed to be serving us, not the other way round. And this is the problem, I think.
I'm going to take a quick step back. Well, a step and a half back. There's you mentioned something about sort of the limiting of human understanding, and
yes,
I'd argue that the sort of our ancestors knew more about reality than we did, even in medieval times. Whether it was colored by religious elements or not.
Yes, of course.
But
yes,
the idea was that reality was mythical, even pretty much up until the Renaissance, essentially with the dawn of humanism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the way that we experienced the world, as dark and grim as it was much more integrated, and the way that spirituality, even based in more traditional senses, it was a part of the world around them. You had your werewolves, fairies, etc. that still permeated the society, and it was still around, and people very very much engaged with it. But then at some point, we really limited ourselves. And
that's right.
And as time has gone on, we're coming to the point where postmodernism isn't really serving us anymore. There's sort of two conclusions you can kind of get with postmodernism. You either you throw everything out until there's really nothing left, and then you go down the road of nihilism, or you turn around and you look at what you threw out and say, okay, well, what is useful here? Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, and I mean that when I say that, I'm talking in reference to the churches and a lot of the disruption and fear and control that was implemented, and our history buried and hidden. I absolutely agree with you there, Ben, totally, because before it may have been, and we believe, another world entirely. And it's all to do with our sense of perception, our sense of reality, I think. And Phil, this is where the interdimensional hypothesis is certainly very interesting in terms of what we've been programmed to accept as reality. But a lot of people, I think, now are beginning to become open-minded with regards to the phenomena, and a lot more people are talking, as I said before, which is wonderful. Researchers don't always agree with one another, but we have to be gentlemanly about it. Even though I may not agree with one thing, I'll certainly be open to it. But certainly I think it's an individual journey, and I think it shapes us as who we are and what we are as human stroke spiritual beings. So I really believe that ultimately, because we've been forced to look at it in a tiny little box, and it's not got us anywhere. There are certain parallels that links one to the other. And this is key, because when UFOs are seen, then this promotes levels of high strangeness that bring in Sasquatch or Dogman or some other weird manifesting being. These things seem to be part and parcel of the phenomena itself, as though there's some kind of instability with regards to the dimensional shifts that are opening. We don't know. But certainly an area that we are still looking into, most definitely.
Well, Philip, I can certainly see a number of shows that we could, attract you for, I hope. We are just about out of time, unfortunately. Can you give us your website one more time, please?
Yes. The website is www.thekinsellatwins.com. Kinsella, K-I-N for November, S-E-L-L-A, and that's thekinsellatwins.com.
Outstanding. All right, very good. Well, Ben, take away our announcements if you would.
Sure thing. So you can look for us at the Exeter UFO Festival in September. That's Memorial Day weekend. And for my dad, you can check him out at the Arizona Dowsers Conference in October.
Visit our show website, behindtheparanormal.com, where you can find nearly 1,200 hours of our regular shows and special broadcasts since 2008 from CBS Radio, Achieve Radio, and here on WOON AM and FM. And there is a special link to the Rendlesham, Return to Rendlesham radio series we did in 2010 and 2011 with all the major theological figures who were with us from that case, and that's all available free. You can also hear many of these broadcasts on the major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.
And you can download our show app. That's free at behindtheparanormal.com. You can browse our books as well, along with those of our great guest co-hosts at our show website, behindtheparanormal.com, where you can find out more about the show, our many cases over the years, our public appearances, and how to book us.
Our website has a charity page with links to several good causes we have adopted and whose organizers we know personally and can vouch for it. This includes the Hope for Hilldale Cemetery in Haverhill, Massachusetts, usacares.org, Canadian Veterans Advocacy, Helping Haiti's Orphans, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of America, the Sisterhood of Ground Zero, and most recently a GoFundMe page for the folks in East Palestine, Ohio, site of the recent train and chemical fire. What do we have next week, Ben?
Well, next week, an apt show, which is on, that's May 21st. Jeez, we're plowing through May, aren't we? Dr. Simeon Hine will be back to continue our conversation about crossover phenomena.
And I have to warn you, fellows, that Steve Bassett is scheduled, the leader of the disclosure movement, in June. So be ready.
Oh, I mean, hey, I have no problem with Steve. I like Steve a lot. It's
Yeah.
I'm just very, very suspicious of
Yes.
it, is all.
Well, anyway, we'll leave you today with a thought from that old sweetheart, Albert Einstein. The most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious. It is the fundamental emotion that stands at the cradle of true art and true science. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno. And thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey. And we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Broadcasting live and local daily from the Navigant Credit Union broadcast studio at the corner of Park Avenue and Kennedy Street in Woonsocket. This is ON AM and FM.